Hi, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm Joe Firestone, your host. Our topic for tonight is Michael Hudson and Radhika Desai, an economic war with China. But before we get to that topic, its priority has been preempted by a new post from Pepe Escobar, which is extremely significant in terms of what is currently going on right now. So I'm going to share that new post. I'm going to share that new post. And I'm going to put the link to the new post in the comments because I didn't have time to put it in the description for the show. So another brilliant Pepe piece, by the way. Title of it is Iran's, quote, new equation reaches way beyond West Asia. And it's dated April 17th, 2024. Just skipping to the end here. This is republished from Sputnik by permission of Pepe Escobar. He writes frequently for, is it Sputnik Globe or Sputnik period? Let me see. Yeah, from Sputnik, not Sputnik, the Globe. So, Iran's, quote, new equation reaches way beyond West Asia. Of course, the new equation refers to the change in the strategic balance, which was introduced by Iran's retaliation, on Israel for its attack on the Iranian consulate in Syria. Here's a picture of a missile and a picture of I'm not sure which Ayatollah that is. It could be Khomeini or it could be Khamenei. I'm not sure which it is. I think it's actually Khomeini. Anyway, a Holy of the Holies was shattered in the Holy Land as Iran staged a quite measured, heavily choreographed response to the Israeli terror attack against its consulate ambassador residence in Damascus, a de facto evisceration of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Immunity. This game changer will directly interfere on how the Anglo-American system manages its simultaneous conflagration with Russia, China, and Iran, three top BRICS members. The key problem is escalations are already built in and will be hard to remove. The total cancel war, against Russia, the genocide in Gaza, with its explicit policy, masterfully decoded by Professor Michael Hudson. And a couple of programs ago, we covered the Michael Hudson piece on the explicit policy of genocide, in Gaza. And the decoupling shaping the terrain against China won't simply vanish, as all communication bridges with the global majority keep being torched. That is, the communication bridges from Israel and the United States to the global majority are being torched, especially from Israel, though. Yet the Iranian message indeed establishes a, quote, new equation, as Tehran christened it, and prefigures many other surprises to come from West Asia. And a little note here from Sputnik is a tweet. The military parades were held throughout Iran to commemorate Army Day. Iran wanted to and did send a clear message. New equation. If the biblical psychopathic entity keeps attacking Iranian interests, from henceforth it will be counterattacked inside Israel. All that in a matter of, quote, seconds, unquote, as the Security Council in Tehran has already cleared all the procedures. Escalation, though, seems inevitable. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak says, quote, but Netanyahu is influenced by his fundamentalist political partners to go into an escalation so he can hold on to power and accelerate the coming of the Messiah, unquote. You see, biblical craziness is entering into this. Compare it to Iranian President Raisi, quote, the smallest act against Tehran's interests will be met with a massive, extensive, and painful response against all its operations. Now, that statement is really practically a declaration of war on Israel. Goodbye to your, quote, invincible, unquote, defense maze. For Tehran, regulating the intensity of the clash in West Asia between Israel and the axis of resistance, while simultaneously establishing strategic deterrence to replace strategic patience, quote unquote, it was a matter of launching a triple wave, a drone swarm opening the path for cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. Now, of course, we've covered that in previous articles from Pepe, and especially from Scott Ritter. And so far this piece, by Pepe, is an amplification of what Scott has had to say about strategic deterrence replacing strategic patience. It is, of course, a little more colorful, as is Pepe's wont. By want, I mean specifically WONT. The performance of the much vaunted Iron Dome, Arrow 3, and David Sling, aided by F-35 fighter jets in the U.S. and the U.K. Naval Force, was not exactly stellar. There's no video of the, quote, outer layer, unquote, Arrow 3 system shooting down anything in space. At least 9 ballistic missiles penetrated the Israeli defense network. And if you'll excuse me here, I'm going to follow the link here. See who wrote about the 9 defense missiles. May have been Scott Ritter. Scoop Iran may have used new hypersonic missiles to pierce Israeli air defenses. No, that doesn't sound like it's Scott. The author, is Ilya Tsukhanov, a Russian author. Well, that's interesting, but I'm not going to be diverted at this point by that very interesting article. At least 9 ballistic missiles penetrated the dense Israeli defense network and hit the Nevatim and Ramon bases. Israel is absolutely mum on the fate of its Golan Heights intel installation hit by cruise missiles. So now things are becoming a little more clear about what hit what. The Golan Heights intel installation was hit by cruise missiles, and the 2 air bases were hit by ballistic missiles. Things becoming a little more clearer as the days pass. Okay, so amidst the classic fog of war, it's irrelevant whether Tehran launched hundreds or dozens of drones and missiles. Regardless of NATO-stan media hype, what's proven beyond the shadow of a doubt is that the supposedly invincible, quote-unquote, Israeli defense maze, ranging from U.S.-made AD/ABM systems to Israeli knockoffs, is helpless in real war against a technologically advanced adversary. What was accomplished by a single operation did raise quite a few professional eyebrows. Iran forced Israel to furiously deplete its stock of interceptors, spend at least $1.35 billion while having its escalatory dominance and deterrence strategy completely shattered. Psychological blow was even fiercer. What if Iran had unleashed a series of strikes without a generous previous warning lasting 7 days? I wondered about that myself. What if US, UK, France, and traitorous Jordan were not ready for coordinated defense? The startling fact, they were all directly dispensing firepower on Tel Aviv's behalf, was not analyzed at all. What if Iran had hit serious industrial and infrastructural targets? Establishing the equation without disturbing a pivot, says Pepe. Predictably, there has been less than zero debate across NATO-stan about the sudden collapse of the fortress Israel myth, which underpins the larger myth of Zionism offering impregnable security for those living in Israel. No more. This narrative spin is DOA. Iran, for its part, could not care less about what NATO-stan spins. The shift towards the new equation, in fact, was generous enough to offer Tel Aviv a de-escalation escape route, which will not be taken at Israel's peril, says Pepe. For Tel Aviv, everything that happened so far spells out strategic defeat across the spectrum, in Gaza, in Lebanon, with the economy tanking, totally losing legitimacy around the world, and now with the added painful loss of deterrence. Here's another tweet. Israeli counterattack, decision made, but timing uncertain. The Israeli Defense Forces have finalized their decision on how to respond to Iran's attack. However, they have not yet determined the timing, as reported by the Jerusalem Post. All eyes are now on what may happen next. Will it finally become clear whether the hegemon prevails or whether Israel runs the, quote, wag the dog, unquote, show? It's essential to consider the Russia-China strategic partnership view. The consensus among Chinese scholars is that the hegemon prefers not to commit too many resources to West Asia, as this would affect the already collapsing Project Ukraine and the strategic planning to counter China in the Asia-Pacific. When it comes to Russia, President Raisi personally called President Putin, and they discussed all relevant details over the phone. Cool, calm, and collected. Also, later this week, Iranian Deputy Prime Minister um, uh, um, Ali Bagheri Khani, who said Iran will respond, quote, within seconds to any new Israeli attack, visits Moscow for the conference on non-proliferation and will also meet with the top echelons of the Russian Foreign Ministry. It's quite remarkable that Iran managed to establish a new equation without disturbing its own pivot to Eurasia after the collapse of the 2015 nuclear deal, while protecting the complex framework engaged, in the defense of Palestine. The hegemon's options are dire. They run from being eventually expelled from West Asia and the Persian Gulf to an unwinnable existential clash against three civilization states: Russia, China, and Iran. What's left as the number one feasible scenario is a carefully calculated retreat to an easily controlled backyard, Latin America, especially South America, manipulating new, convenient, sovereign deprived asset, Argentina, and of course, maintaining control over deindustrialized and sovereignty deprived uh, by Europe. This does not change the fact that U.S. power projection is on the wane, but globally is the way the wind is blowing. The Straussian neocon psychodementia is unsustainable. The question is whether they can be progressively purged from the U.S. power structure before they attempt to plunge the global majority into their irrational depths of doom. That was a slap, of course, at the neocons here in America. And the reference to Strauss is the reference to Leo Strauss, the political theorist who informed so much of the insanity of the neocons. He was he was someone who came to the United States. I forget exactly when, whether it was just before the war or just after the war, but he became a political theory professor at the University of Chicago. And he was instrumental in educating, a lot of the neocons. And don't forget the new BRICS equation. By contrast, on the global majority front, over 40 nations want to join BRICS and counting, according to the head of the Russian Council Committee on International Affairs, whose name is Grigory Karasin. After a meeting of the chairman of the International Affairs Committees of BRICS parliaments last week in Moscow, Karasin noted how many BRICS member nations understand that they should not rush to create a rigid charter, seeing how counterproductive, and even provocative the European Union is acting. The name of the game is flexibility. Another tweet: Nigeria's intent to join BRICS is in line with its interest in a more equitable global financial and development system. Ben Akabuizi, the Director General of the country's budget office, said to Sputnik. I have to mention here, Nigeria. It's a surprise to me that they did not precede South Africa in coming into BRICS, because they are and have been for a long time the most populous country, in Africa. Their population is roughly in the 215 million range, and it dwarfs the populations of the most populous of the other African nations, including Egypt and South Africa. Anyway, the Director General of the country's budget office told Sputnik, quote, the way I see it, BRICS is all part of a strategy to seek a more, and then there's a link to the Twitter tweet, or the X tweet, which I will not follow. Alistair Crook has touched on a key theme that runs through my new book, Eurasia versus NATO-stan. Quote, anything that was good and true about Western civilization is preserved and thriving in Russia. This is the unspoken insight that so infuriates the Western elites, and it is also why, in part, BRICS states so evidently look to Russia for leadership. I don't know how I feel about that particular quote, but it's a very interesting quote. The new equation established by Iran, a sovereign BRICS member, will do wonders to solidify this multilateral, multicultural state of cooperation as the Europe and its, quote, aircraft carrier, unquote, in West Asia, except in the covert ops department, are increasingly reduced to the role, okay, of a paper tiger. And the covert ops department, of course, is intelligence, okay, and the CIA's efforts, okay, inside of West Asia, to overturn whatever nations in that area it does not like. He's saying, except for the CIA, the other goings on in West Asia by the hegemon, okay, and Israel, its aircraft carrier, are increasingly reduced, okay, to the role of a paper tiger. I wanted to air that. It goes beyond Scott's considerations by pointing out the connections of what's happened to the longer-term trend of BRICS and the emergence of the multipolar world. And that's what is so important about, okay, this particular article. It doesn't quite go as far, okay, as Scott. So it goes further than the original article by Scott of the missiles, okay, of April, but doesn't quite go as far, okay, as Scott in his Checkmate article, okay, in which he expresses the idea that the vulnerability of Israel, okay, and the collective West, okay, in West Asia that has been established through the Iranian retaliation, also speaks, okay, to the vulnerability of the collective West, okay, in Europe, in the Chinese theater, and also in Taiwan, in Taiwan, and in the area of Japan, okay, and East Asia, where the allies and the bases of the United States are all vulnerable to the kind of missile attack that was launched by the Iranians, okay, against Israel. In Europe, the vulnerability comes from the missile and drone capability, okay, of Russia, okay, and in East Asia, okay, it comes from the missile and drone capability, okay, of China. But in each of those areas of the world, it comes from the idea that the anti-ballistic missile defenses of the West don't work against the kind of very broad attack that was launched against Israel by the nation, of Iran. That shows that the technological balance, and with it the strategic balance, has changed. So with that, I will now move to what I thought would be the main article for tonight, still very important. How the U.S. is waging economic war on China. This article is primarily by Michael Hudson. By Michael Hudson. But it's also conducted in the context of a dialogue. It's the transcription of a dialogue with Radhika Desai, who's a professor of economics at the University of Saskatchewan, in Canada. Michael's case, he is distinguished professor at University of Missouri at Kansas City. And I stated earlier in one of my broadcasts, he's also well known, as an MMTer, but he's mostly well known for his absolutely prolific record in publishing books, over the years, and in the overwhelming importance of some of these books. As we go through this article, we will be introduced to some of his books as well. So Radhika Desai says, hello and welcome to the 26th Geopolitical Economy Hour, the show that examines the fast-changing political and geopolitical economy of our times. I'm Radhika Desai. Michael Hudson responds and says, but I'm Michael Hudson. Radhika says, and working behind the scenes to bring you our show every fortnight are our host, Ben Norton, our videographer, Paul Graham, and our transcriber, Zach Weiser. In our last two shows, we looked at China's economy and where it was headed, busting major Western myths about it and highlighting the differences between the Chinese and U.S. economies that explain the dynamism of the former and the productive decline, the latter. So, of course, I have to recommend these last two shows because their subject is very, very important. And it seems to me these two posts are posts that actually present very key lessons that the U.S. economy and other economies of the Western world could stand to learn. We spoke about how China was embarked on engineering the next industrial revolution through a major structural transformation, not only to continue its high growth, but also to improve its quality technologically and in human terms. And in doing this, China is increasingly taking the technological lead in more and more frontier sectors, including green technology, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology. In today's show, we look at how the United States is responding to the structural transformation of China's economy. Our short answer is badly. It keeps military and diplomatic tensions high, continues provocative visits of high-ranking officials to Taiwan, and tries to stoke up trouble between China and its neighbors and rings China around with new military alliances. It continues its economic provocations against China that fill the headlines these days, interrupted only, as with recent phone call between Presidents Biden and Xi, and visits of Secretaries of Treasury and State to China by shows of attempting to cooperate with China. The fronts of the economic attack, are proliferating. The Asian infrastructure development, Huawei, TikTok, also electronic vehicles, solar panels, steel and shipbuilding, and the matter of China's consumption and the world market's overcapacity. No doubt there will be more. The fundamental cause is pretty clear. The United States had sought to engage China in the closing decade of the last century under the delusion that such engagement would result in the complete and snug subordination of China's economy to U.S. capital. However, by the end of that decade, the BRICS thesis already signaled problems, and halfway into the first decade of the new century, the economic war with China had begun. President George Bush slapped 30% tariffs on Chinese steel. This was followed by President Obama's pivot to Asia, President Trump's trade and technology war, and now President Biden's widening hybrid war on China. His national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, frankly admitted in his speech last April that the U.S. has had to contend with the reality that a large non-market economy has been integrated into the international economic order in a way that posed considerable challenges. Of course, President Bush was forced to rescind his tariffs less than a year later, and the U.S. corporate capitalist class remains highly divided on the exact policies to adopt towards China. Over the brief decade or so of engagement, substantial parts of the U.S. corporate capitalist class had become deeply reliant on China, on its workers, on its suppliers, and even on its markets. No complete break is really possible. This is finessed in public discourse by splitting hairs, such as, for instance, shifting from talking about decoupling to talking about de-risking. However, those for continued engagement are opposed by two powerful forces. There are the sectors of the capitalist class that are threatened by China's technological advances, such as Google and Meta, the parent company of Facebook, of course, and they are leading the anti-China charge. On the other hand, U.S. ruling circles, which continue to pursue corporate neoliberal policies designed for their benefit, need to offer the vast majority of working Americans who are suffering under these policies an explanation for their misery. And nothing is more useful than blaming China. So the technological and hybrid war continues, and today we want to discuss some of the key elements. And Michael and I thought we would begin talking about Huawei. But Michael, why don't you take that away? So that's the question posed by Radhika Desai after a rather masterful summary of the emergence of the lines of competition and conflict between the United States and China. Now Michael Hudson replies, well, the beginning really is what America means by a non-market economy. It means an economy that is better at competing internationally than the United States. It's not a market economy if the United States can't gain control of it and do something better. And that's the problem that the United States had with Huawei ever since the U.S. began to move its industry under the Clinton administration to China. The United States can't compete in industrial products, and it only has a few raw materials, oil, gas, and agricultural exports to support the balance of payments. That leaves only one way that the United States can balance its payments enough so that it can afford all of the 800 plus military bases that it has all over the world, and can afford to fight in Ukraine and Palestine, and in the China Sea. So in other words, if there's only one way, and if that way is not, a viable way, what Michael just said, implies that what we really have to do is withdraw all our 800 plus military bases from all over the world, because we can't afford them except for what Michael's about to talk about. And that is, so the solution is it needs economic rent. It needs to monopolize some high growth area of the economy that other countries are not allowed to compete in. Well, one of the great growth areas is, of course, the move towards 5G communications technology. And Huawei, of course, a Chinese company, is way ahead of the United States there. That's why it was being adopted everywhere. What could the United States do? It couldn't really compete. So it asked Canada to place under arrest the daughter of the head of Huawei and said, well, we're essentially going to keep you under home arrest until you agree to let us have this technology. We don't want anyone else to have a technology that is growing that we can't control because that's a threat to our national security. And Huawei was a threat to national security because if the United States can't get its market, how is it ever going to have a market enough to support the balance of payments and be the unique country? That is a very sage observation, okay, by Michael, and very, very clear analysis. And here's one of Michael's books. Is it the first one to appear in this article? They're all on the side as we go through the article, which is very, very interesting, of course. This book is Temples of Enterprise, Creating Economic Order in the Bronze Age, but Near East. That's a historical study as well as an economic analysis by Michael Hudson. And Huawei was sort of the first symptom of all this. And in fact, it's just posted its largest and fastest growth on record. And from the U.S. point of view, the U.S. investors don't control it, and U.S. bankers are not making the loans to it. So there's no way that the United States can benefit from Huawei. The problem is that the beneficiary is Chinese. That is not what America had in mind under Clinton when it thought of the grand opening to China. China was supposed to let American companies come in and to rely on American banks to expand. That's not what Huawei has done, says Michael. So the umbrella legal and political excuse for trying to exclude Huawei and to bring pressure on the European countries and America's NATO allies not to use Huawei is national security. And the Energy and Commerce Committee of the United States issued a report a little while ago, and it said, quote, foreign adversaries have used access to data to disrupt America's daily lives, to conduct espionage activities, and to push disinformation and propaganda campaigns in an attempt to undermine our democracy and gain global influence and control. There should be an unquote there, but there's not. Well, the problem is, says Michael, that control is the key. Huawei did not let the National Security Agency and the CIA have a backdoor into its products. And if the United States cannot listen to what people say over Huawei, it gets very insecure. We don't know what other people are saying. It's sort of like silk making. The West tried for a long time to get silkworms from China so that you could bring it to Europe. Finally, some priests brought some silkworms, and Italy's silk industry started all that. Well, the United States would like to do the same thing with Huawei, to turn technology into a rent-extracting monopoly, intellectual property privilege, and it wants to steal China's platform, to make a long story short. Wow, that reply was really powerful, wasn't it? Radhika Desai says, no, this is so true, Michael. It's interesting. She says, no, this is so true, Michael. You would think she would have said, yes, this is so true, Michael. And I just thought I would make a few points really to reinforce what you're saying. Because as you say, the United States is insistent on keeping its monopolies. And this insistence arises from the fact that increasingly the leading sectors of the U.S. economy rely on the sort of political imposition of uh, 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 monopoly. It is not a natural monopoly in the sense that it's arrived at through out competing You're successfully outcompeting rivals. So if you think about what are the leading sectors of the U.S. economy, there's the military industrial complex, there's the finance, insurance, and real estate sector, there's big pharma, and there's information and communication uh, technology. And if you think about, I don't see the health insurance sector here. Okay, I think that's also a very leading sector of the U.S. economy and one we ought to get rid of. But going on, and if you think about it, the military industrial complex requires essentially the creation of an artificial U.S. monopoly by the expansion of NATO and the imposition of its interoperability requirements, which keeps expanding the market for the U.S. defense producers, no matter how bad they may be, how bad the quality of their products may be. Similarly, the fire sector relies on the international dominance of the dollar, which is, of course, uh, threatened by BRICS, of course, we must add. But nevertheless, the United States keeps trying to do everything in its power to continue it. Big Pharma, okay, and international communications and technology, ICT, rely on patents and copyrights and, basically intellectual property rights. And those scholars who study intellectual property rights have pointed out that the United States is actually pursuing the wrong policy. If you want to keep and maintain a technological lead, you don't do it by trying to consolidate your existing technology or trying to back your existing technology with intellectual property rights. You do it by continuously innovating. And this, in fact, doing the first is actually counterproductive to doing the second because you're trying to retain an existing advantage rather than constantly developing new technological advantages. So, in that sense, this is the wrong strategy. The United States is pursuing that strategy rather, and I would say that China is pursuing the other. And the other thing is that, when the United States securitizes everything, so, in the name of national security, the United States wants to give subsidies to all sorts of corporations to develop their products and R&D and what have you. The fact of the matter is that this strategy, which really sort of confuses the issue, is far less effective. Therefore, the United States is losing the technological lead uh, uh, through this strategy rather than the strategy that China adopts, which is really to focus on developing the technologies, whether security or civilian or whatever. That's why, as you rightly pointed out, Michael, Huawei has not spent much time worrying about the ways in which the United States wants to restrict it by restricting the export of various types of chips and so on. Huawei has continued to innovate, and I have no doubt that even with the recent the chip wars and so on, the Chinese are actually not going to take very long before they will outcompete technologically the U.S. technological lead on chips. So, and finally, you're so right, when you point out the United States wants to spy on everyone, which is why it does not want Chinese companies, which will not allow them to spy on the rest of the world, to have any share of the world market in technologies where you can collect big data, etc., because the United States governments and all the major U.S. ICT corporations are already cooperating with one another. The United States has access to our data, and the U.S. just does not want anybody else to have the same access. So this is what we are looking at. And of course, associated with this is the whole issue of TikTok. TikTok has also been named as a security threat, okay, etc. And you notice that I'm not sure whether the anti-TikTok bill got through Congress or yet, but they've been trying to pass uh, a very anti-TikTok bill, which basically would get rid of TikTok here in the United States, in spite of its popularity, okay, with Americans. So, uh, okay, going on with the article. So, Michael, why don't we talk a little bit about TikTok? And Michael replies, TikTok exemplifies, and here's another one of Michael's books. This is The Collapse of Antiquity. It's a fairly recent book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. It is said to be a very brilliant book uh, and a very important book as well. Michael Hudson, TikTok exemplifies the distinction between what you call the wrong strategy and the right strategy. Your idea of the right strategy is long-term research and development. But for the financial sector in the United States, that's the wrong strategy, because if you spend money in research and development, you cannot use it to pay dividends and to buy back stocks. The financial sector lives in the short term. So you're really saying that the U.S. follows a short-term financial strategy and China follows a long-term strategy of research and development. Well, that's what led to TikTok, which China says has a much more sophisticated platform strategy than the United States platforms have. That's why TikTok threatens Silicon Valley's monopoly on its platforms, and it also steals the hopes to monopolize the social media. I think this comment is very pregnant with wisdom and understanding, but uh, one important thing that I have to point out, which Michael may do somewhere in the article or later on, but okay, it's fairly clear that the short-term financial strategy, okay, of the United States has to do with the corporate form of capitalism that the United States has developed to such a degree uh, 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 here. That form of capitalism is directed and governed by short-term financial strategies because of the extreme emphasis, okay, on the necessity to continuously have high and impressive sorts of profits, okay, for the stock market. The stock market is driving the short-term financial strategy. If you participate in the stock market, as of course all the private companies do, all the capitalist uh, companies do, that's going to affect whether or not you follow a long-term strategy of research and development. Uh, China, of course, is not involved, okay, in Wall Street. Some of the Chinese companies are, I guess, but generally speaking, China is not involved, okay, in Wall Street. But China is still, okay, a socialist country. Okay, some would say it's still, okay, a communist country. And even though it's very much involved in markets these days and very much involved with capitalism these days, capitalism is still controlled by the government and by political forces, okay, and by the Communist Party, okay, in China. And so they can apply and use a long-term strategy of research, okay, and development, okay, in China. I know Michael understands that. I'm not offering anything new to Michael, who's a Marxist from way, way back. He's one of the few Marxist economists who survived the Cold War, and he did so by hooking up with some right-wing think tanks. He's really been a master at surviving while still keeping uh, the Marxist foundations of his thought. So that's a very interesting thing to recognize. The United States hoped that Facebook and X and the other platforms would be monopolized. What you call intellectual property rights are really monopoly rights. And again, that's absolutely true. And I just don't like to call it, that, because monopoly is a bad word. But that's what America wants. And America cannot have a monopoly right if people are having the free choice to choose TikTok, because it's created a better overall system. And it's in 150 countries. It has 1 billion people and 170 million Americans, and the United States can't control it, just like with Huawei. That's what upsets Washington. So the question is, how do you make these 170 million Americans when your technology can't be used to use a backdoor? What they did was a number of things. They've accused China and TikTok of somehow being a threat to national security, because that's an umbrella that can cover absolutely anything that you want. Well, TikTok has spent $1.5 billion with an American firm to ascertain that there's no way in which China can have access to this. The United States simply ignores this because the facts don't matter. It's a danger to the dollar and the hegemony of the United States. So the platform disturbs Washington for a number of reasons. And that's because of what can be said about uh, because of what can be said on it. The government of Israel has especially complained to the United States that there's much more opposition to the war in Palestine on TikTok than there is on Facebook and on X. Very interesting. And in fact, Facebook has censored any defense of the Palestinians. And for every 3 posts of support for Palestine on TikTok, there's only one on Instagram, okay, or the others. So Israel has told Biden that this is a national security threat to the duopoly between Biden and Netanyahu for the war to drive out the Palestinians who control the Near Eastern oil. Well, the Palestinians don't control all. For the war to drive out the Palestinians who control the Near Eastern oil. I don't think the Palestinians, I'm not sure what he meant there. And if you accuse Israel of genocide, then that's a threat to U.S. national security. And where are these accusations? They're on TikTok because they're all censored on the other platforms, and the United States doesn't have censorship powers over TikTok. So that's why it says you've got to sell to the United States or go out of business. Well, China has said we'd rather go out of business and lose the money that we are making in the United States and give you the billions and billions of dollars that we've developed for the programming for TikTok so that you can use it and take away our markets. You know, this is not going to be another case of the silkworms being lost to the West. And a number of far-right Republicans are saying TikTok's a spying operation. And it doesn't matter what the reality is, they're just accusing them. And of course, you have Stephen Mnuchin, the former Treasury Secretary under Trump, saying that he's putting together a group of buyers to try to buy TikTok. He thinks he'll be able to make it a killing. And obviously, that's not going to happen because the Chinese won't allow TikTok to be sold. That's certainly not going to happen is the United States is sending Yellen. And what's certainly not going to happen is the United States is sending Yellen to China now to say, why don't you send ByteDance, the overall worldwide operations? That's what we want. Well, the United States has nothing to offer in exchange. It's just making demand. And all that can really do in the end is to close TikTok. And we'll see what political effects of all that are, because obviously many of the younger people who already are disapproving of the Biden administration say, well, we want free speech. As long as the United States is leading the world fight against free speech, then I'll let you finish. What the hell does that mean? Radhika says, no, exactly. I think that what the United States would really like, as you say, is to totally monopolize social media, because then the ability of the United States to essentially dominate the information space would be vastly enhanced, because all the social media companies would essentially be parroting what the United States says. So it wants to eliminate any possibility that there will be any other type of information that will be available. But of course, this is not going to happen that easily, because in addition to the social media, as we know, China, Russia, and many other countries too have increasingly been creating their own information space and creating their own media companies and so on, which put forward a different point of view. And today, along with all sorts of alternative news websites, these websites are part of the information space for those who realize that the mainstream media does not give you the correct view and would like to try and see what other views there are. So you know, whether it is a Global Times or CGTN, which of course is a Chinese network, or RT, or various Indian news media websites, they do provide a different perspective. There are a couple of other points one should make about this. It was, remember that Trump originally proposed a ban on TikTok, and in the course of discussions about that, there were many people said that, oh, well, TikTok is very addictive and harmful and so on. Well, in China, the social media is actually controlled a lot more. In the U.S., because the social media are essentially vast, essentially belong to big corporations whose right to make profits are never to be challenged. Okay, the United States refuses to regulate social media, whereas China regulates it. China has rules and regulations to protect children from harm, and China will not say anything if the United States wishes to protect its children, not only from any adverse effects of TikTok, but also any other social media. But the United States refuses to do that. Second point is that not only is it true that TikTok is one of the few social media websites where you can voice criticism of what Israel is doing in Palestine, etc., but it's also true that because of this freedom, younger people are basically users of TikTok disproportionately. Their importance in the coming election is going to be huge. They've become very critical of the Biden administration. And in recognition of this, President Biden himself, on the one hand, says he will sign into law any law against TikTok which is passed by the Senate, now that it's already been passed by the House. But why, on the one hand, he says that, on the other hand, he himself acquired a TikTok account. Another point that one should make as well is that TikTok is often regarded as a Chinese company. It's not a Chinese company. Its CEO is based in Singapore. What's more, a number of U.S. investors would stand to lose from TikTok, which is why I don't think it's very clear that the Senate is going to pass this legislation. Okay. Among the U.S. investors that have a fair bit invested in TikTok are the following companies that I've just made this list from reading several different sources. They include BlackRock, Fidelity, General Atlantic, Sequoia Capital, Susquehanna, KOTU Management, and T. Rowe Price. Some pretty big companies in the financial area. So we know that in the House, the legislation got passed chiefly because of the concern over criticism of Israel, but it remains to be seen exactly what happens, and I completely agree with you, Michael. I think that if it comes to it and the Senate does pass this law and President Biden signs it into law, I don't think the Chinese are going to sell TikTok. I think they would rather just shut down TikTok. They'll be shutting it down here in the United States, of course, but not elsewhere. So we've talked about Huawei, we've talked about TikTok, and by the way, I should remind you that there are also disagreements between different so-called U.S. allies. I'm reminded that some years ago, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, when it was first floated, the British government actually joined the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, even though President Obama very loudly asked them not to. So there are, not only is the U.S. capital class divided, but U.S. and its allies are divided on many fronts. But now let's come to the next point, that we want to discuss, which is the whole matter of U.S. steel and U.S. Shipbuilding. You know that the United States Steelworkers has made a petition to the U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai. Katherine Tai has agreed to look at this and take it very seriously because, and let me just share here a brief statement by her. You see here a Katherine Tai statement where, in response to the United Steelworkers petition, she pointed out that we have seen the People's Republic of China create dependencies and vulnerabilities in multiple sectors like steel, aluminum, solar, batteries, and critical minerals, harming American workers and businesses and creating real risks for our supply chains. I look forward to reviewing this petition in detail. So once again, here we have another instance of blaming China for the misery of U.S. workers, which is actually created by neoliberal policies. Wouldn't you agree, Michael? Michael Hudson says, yeah, so the United States policy is that it has to control all key areas on national security grounds. I think the reason is, we've talked before, the U.S. plan is to go to war with China in 10 years. And you want to prepare for that. If all of a sudden you went to war, you're still depending on China for goods, that would disrupt the U.S. economy. So the U.S. wants to prepare for this war, presumably war with China, by separating as much as you can right now. That begins with steel. And it's not only independent from China, but from Japan too, which has been most in the news here, is that Japanese companies want to buy U.S. steel, which used to be the major steel industry in the country. And again, the United States is claiming that even though Japan is our satellite, our ally, it doesn't want it. So Nippon Steel offers $15 billion to acquire U.S. steel. And the Biden administration opposes this. By the way, I think it should. And Donald Trump already has threatened to block, the Nippon deal. And the present administration wants to do the same thing. And I suspect almost any administration would do that thing. And the labor unions are involved because U.S. Steel is a unionized shop, and the labor unions have come out against saying, no, we want a U.S. controller that we can pressure. But it's not only China, it's Japan, it's everyone. So the U.S. limiting its imports from China is against the entire world. And the only reason China is mentioned is it's the main country that's able to produce these imports. And the United States, essentially, if it cuts itself off from China in its attempt to be self sufficient, it's going to essentially cut itself off from the whole rest of the world that is trading with China. This will not help the United States compete because the steelworkers in America, in order to get enough money to pay for their medical care, for their housing, for what it costs to live in America, simply cannot compete with almost any other country, whether it's Japan uh, uh, um, or the United States. So it's good to look at steel as just an example of how far the United States can stretch the national security umbrella. Radhika Desai says, exactly. And the fact of the matter is that U.S. Steel has been one of the earliest victims of the deindustrialization of the United States that set in. Once Ronald Reagan came to power and began to impose his neoliberal policies, um, the monetarist policies, beginning with imposing the infamous W-shaped recession of the early 1980s. So the deindustrialization of the U.S. began then. Today, if you look at the shipbuilding industries, the major producers of steel are not in the United States. They are in China, they are in Japan, they are in Korea, and elsewhere. By the way, the U.S. Steelworkers petition refers specifically to shipbuilding. Here also, we see an astonishing decline of the United States. I just wanted to share a few slides that show this. So let's look at this one to begin with. So if you look at the slide, what you see is that the U.S. is not a significant player in the shipbuilding industry. This is from the Financial Times. Okay, and there's a tweet from Carlos Morel. Shipbuilding, the new battleground in the U.S.-China trade war. Labor unions are urging the Biden administration to investigate China's dominance of naval engineering, potentially inflaming Sino-America tensions. That's a quote tweet of the following chart. The U.S. is not a significant player in the U.S. In the global shipbuilding industry. The percentage of global gross tonnage built 2022 ranked by country of origin. First is China, 25.99 million metric tons. I guess that's metric tons. South Korea has about, their second, they have 60%, okay, of China's shipping. Then there's, Japan, who seem to have 1/3 of the amount that China has in shipping. Then we have a lot of big players. Those are the top three, and the only really significant ones in shipping. But the others, Italy, and this is their rank order: France, Vietnam, Philippines, Germany, Russia. You must be wondering by this time, where's the United States? Finland, Singapore, Croatia, but Netherlands, but Turkey can't even find the United States on this chart. Okay, let me see if when I bring up Twitter here, okay, I can get to the United States on this chart. Yeah, after Croatia is Netherlands, Turkey, Norway, then finally the United States that only has 73,000 tons of shipping compared to 25.9 million tons of shipping from China. I mean, that's very wild. Uh, anyway, And you see here that China accounts for nearly 50% of the world's shipbuilding, followed by South Korea, which accounts for another 30% and more, and Japan, which accounts for another 20% and more. So you can see that the rest of the industrialized world, so to speak, or shall we say post-industrial world, accounts for tiny fractions of that. And among these, the United States is down here at the very bottom with hardly anything. Let me also show you another. I mean, we're still probably the greatest naval power of the world when it comes to the instruments, okay, of war, right? But okay, our commercial shipbuilding and shipping is at the bottom of the heap. Isn't that amazing? Let me also show you another really interesting point here, which is that Forbes magazine reported that U.S. shipbuilding is at its lowest ebb ever. This was the name of the story. How did the U.S. fall so far? And in this story, among other things, Forbes notes that a nation that was among the world's leaders in commercial shipbuilding at key junctures in the history today builds less than 10 vessels, actual number of vessels for ocean-going commerce in a typical year. China, by contrast, builds over 1,000 vessels every year. So you can see 10 versus 1,000. China's shipbuilding is 100 times bigger than the United States. The entire U.S. registered fleet of ocean-going commercial ship numbers fewer than 200 vehicles out of a global total of 44,000. This is despite trade flows to and from America exceeding $1 trillion annually. So the United States is among the biggest trading nations in the world. It should own the ships that bring the goods that it buys and sells and take away the goods that it sells, but it does not do so. U.S. registered ships carry barely 1% of the traffic that comes to the U.S. And we have this graph, the decline of shipbuilding, which accelerated under Reagan, as we were just saying. There's another tweet here. U.S. commercial shipbuilding saw a massive decline during the Reagan presidency and is now smaller than the Norwegian industry. And there is the decline. Okay, but in blue. And of course, in naval shipbuilding also. But the decline, okay, in blue in commercial shipbuilding is astonishing. From way up there. Really amazing. So here you have two lines. The blue line is commercial shipbuilding and the red line is naval shipbuilding. So this is related to defense. And you can see that beginning in the Reagan presidency, there's been a sharp decline in both, with some improvement here, but these are just ordinary numbers of vessels. You can see the decline is really quite massive because even if these numbers show some recovery here, they are minuscule compared to the world total. This is the sorry state of U.S. industry, of which shipbuilding is just the tip of the iceberg. Michael Hudson, yeah, I can't add anything to that except the Forbes article went on to say, a follow-up article on saying that navies are obsolete. If China is able to send 1 million drones against any kind of U.S. Naval vessel, no U.S. naval vessel is safe, given the modern technology where it's so easy to build a drone or a rocket to wipe out an aircraft carrier or a battleship or even a submarine. So I think the United States is smart enough to give up on the idea of naval warfare. We'll see what happens in the China Sea. And Radhika replies, I think that point is quite an interesting one because, of course, today destructive capacity is very widely spread, you know. So you have Turkey and Iran building very high technology drones. And this shows that actually, since the ability to inflict harm is now so widely spread around the world, it makes very little sense to make enemies around the world. The United States is going around doing. I think, to me, that's the main lesson. That does not, however, mean that control over transportation routes and so on is not an important part of securing your country's interests and so on. There has been historically very few powers that have not controlled transport and logistics. And if China has certainly not only increased its shipbuilding capacities, but also increased its carrying capacity, a number of ships that China has increasingly, China also controls more and more ports around the world, and to whom, again, it is sort of distributing its logistics software, which is now being increasingly adopted by more and more ports around the world. So, in that sense, I think China certainly represents a challenge to the United States. And if China wishes, sorry, if the United States wishes to antagonize China, China has a lot of power with which to inflict harm on the United States. And I just want to add one final point. You know, the United States has long been talking about having industrial policy. And obviously, with the United Steelworkers petition around shipbuilding, the matter comes down to, can the United States pursue successful industrial policy, for example, to revive its shipbuilding? And there again, we see there are a number of obstacles the U.S. faces. After 40 years of neoliberalism, the United States has reduced itself to a position where even if it were to try to seriously engage in having an industrial policy to revive its industry, it would suffer from a number of obstacles. Number one, there is a lack of skills. You know, the number of graduates that are graduating in STEM subjects, the science, technology, mathematics, etc., science, engineering, technology, and mathematics, are relatively few compared to other powers who are more serious about their industry, including China. There's also a lack of suppliers, the tendency to have just-in-time but production is simply not conducive to having a reasonable industrial policy and building resilience. And finally, you have an entire capitalist class that requires high profits in the short term, whereas industrial policy requires being patient, accepting low profits for a long time before your investment finally occurs. Your investment finally comes into stream and matures in order to deliver high profits. And none of these elements or aspects of successful industrial policy actually exist today in the United States. In short, and I'm going to add this comment, okay, the United States has been, over a long period of time, not simply deindustrializing, but it has been de-developing. We have not noticed because so many high-level technological products are being sold here in the United States, and we get to use them and we get to experience them, and we think we're a very high-tech technology country. We also have some areas, okay, in the United States which do produce and research extremely high technology. So, from the point of view of an American, we don't see de-development happening. But when you talk about certain sectors, like the shipping sector, okay, like the chip sector, and some of the other sectors that were talked about here, by Michael, okay, and by Radhika, you understand that compared to other countries, we are de-developing, and we have to redevelop. We have to look at ourselves as a developing nation. China looks at itself, okay, as a developing nation still, in spite of the fact that they're near to becoming the premier power of the world in economic development. And yet, they're still looking at themselves, okay, as a developing nation that has to continuously innovate. And we need to do that. Going on, Michael Hudson says, well, that's why Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is in China now. Shall we go on to discuss? Absolutely. Go ahead, Michael. Okay, now I must assess where we are right now. I need to see how far we have to go in this piece because it's a very, very long piece. Okay, so scrolling down, this answers my question. I'm going to postpone the remainder of this, until tomorrow. And this is a very good stopping place, a really excellent um, um, stopping place. Michael Hudson starts talking about the Yellen trip, okay, to China. So I don't know if this will survive. I don't think it survives the close of this, but I can get back to it tomorrow. So tomorrow I will try to do the rest of this very, very long, and I think you'll agree, very, very important article. But for now, I'm going to entertain your comments, okay, if there are any. If we got any people at all here tonight to hear what I think is this very important stream. Well, we do have more people than I thought. We do have 13 people. Thank you for coming. Not too many comments, though. We have, there's Steve Wolfbrand. Hi, Steve. Steve says, I shared this to Pasta via DM asking him to help the channel get a foothold on YT. We'll see what happens. Well, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that. Kron says, Aaron Burnett just interviewed the foreign minister from Iran. Well, good. I'm glad to see somebody's talking to the Iranian foreign minister, even though it may not be the Israelis. Steve says, nobody I know in real life believes anything penetrated the Iron Dome. A pity. It's not just a pity. It's criminal. It's the screen of falsity, the screen of false narrative that's presented by our mass media. The truth just does not get through. Who reads Scott Ritter, okay, after all? Who reads Pepe Escobar, okay, in the mainstream? Nobody reads these sources. Only people like us read these sources and pay attention to them. Andy Kenny says, hi, Joe and friends, stopping in while kids are in the tub. Why does BRICS prefer high population countries, okay, under their umbrella? They did to start off with because they wanted to make, okay, a big impact and to select the countries in the world they thought were the most important countries that were not part, okay, of the collective West, because they were seen, okay, as an alternative, okay, to the collective West. But obviously, there are 40 countries that want to join BRICS. In the coming year, we may see a very large expansion. It will still be biased towards towards large countries, okay, as opposed to small countries, because one of the objectives, okay, of BRICS was to develop, to have those countries in it that dominate the global economy, and those are, okay, of necessity, uh, 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 the largest countries. Look at Latin America. It's not surprising that the largest country in Latin America, both in area, population, specifically Brazil, was one of the founders, okay, of BRICS. Okay, it's not surprising that the largest country in the world, okay, in area, and also a large population country in itself, specifically Russia, was one of the founders, okay, of BRICS. It's not surprising that the currently largest population in the world country, specifically India, is part of BRICS. China is the second largest country in population, okay, in the world. But when BRICS was formed, it was the largest, okay. And then South Africa is one of the countries in Africa with the largest, okay, populations. I think it's about maybe third or fourth. I'm pretty sure it's certainly fourth. I don't know. It may be third. I think Egypt has a larger population than South Africa, and I know Nigeria has much larger. And he says, I saw somewhere that Biden said the U.S. will turn a blind eye to attacks on Rafah if Israel prompts. I know that was reported to me by Lisa today also. 11 or 12 more Palestinians were killed in Rafah. Okay, okay, today. So yeah, okay, basically the report is that what Biden did is basically to sell out Rafah. I'm not going to bother you, okay, over Rafah, okay, if you don't hit back, okay, at Iran. Uh, that's all shameful because what's going on in Rafah, okay, is a genocide, and the United States is complicit, okay, in genocide, and that's just one more instance of the complicity. Complicity. I'm not going to do what I can to stop the genocide, okay, in Rafah. Okay, if you promise not to hit back, okay, at Iran, because I'm worried about getting beaten up, by Iran in a new war in Western Asia. That's basically what that amounted to. Robert Copeman says at least two of the BRICS nations have a declining birth rate, and it will be losing population in the future. Okay, the nations are China, okay, and Russia. Yeah, but China and Russia. Okay, first of all, I don't think Russia will be losing population, okay, in the future. I think Russia has been losing population because its population collapsed following the collapse of the Soviet Union and the extreme hurt that was done, okay, to the economy of Russia at that time. 10 million people died in Russia in the ensuing years after the collapse. So Russia went down from 150 million to 140 million at that time. And since then, okay, they have been gaining population. I don't believe the projections that say that Russia is going to continue to lose population because it's a nation that, okay, is huge and has plenty of space for more people in it. And as its economy grows and as its prosperity grows, I think the birth rate, okay, in Russia is going to start to increase again, and the population is going to start to grow again. Okay, as it is now, its population is already something like 154 million. It has gained population since the collapse to 140 million, or roughly speaking. So, okay, I don't believe, okay, the projections, okay, of the population of people. Okay, with respect to China, okay, the decline in population is due to the planning of China. It is wanted to have a population that is smaller because if that happens, it can more easily eradicate the poverty in China. Okay, it could more easily handle the environmental and the climate issues, okay, in China. And because relative to its population, even though China is a very large area, close to an area, okay, as large as the United States, uh, when you consider its population of 1.4 billion people, it's still relatively crowded, okay, in certain areas. China can afford to lose population. And so I don't think that's particularly a problem, Robert. Andy Kenny says, get to delve into the subject, though. Got 10 kids right now. God, 10 kids here right now. That's amazing, Andy. What did you do to deserve such largesse? So Kay says, hi, Robert. Robert says, hi, Kay. And he says, Joe, but did you know Danny wrote a book and he posted that it was praised in his get together in China where he's at right now? You mean Danny Haifang? No, I did not know that Danny wrote a book. Okay, was uh, I'm sure I'd like to read that book. Okay, says busy Andy laugh out loud. Andy says, man, the U.S. better stop their BS with China. I just ordered sunglasses that let you see in the back of you for about $2 to $3. Oh, we'll be here on 26th Sunglasses that let you see in the back of you? My God. Kay, it's your birthday, right? Oops, wrong Kay, sorry. Steve Wolfbrand said that. I said, oops, wrong Kay, sorry. Robert Clump said, I don't think BRICS is as great as some people think it is now. Well, no, I don't think it's as great as some people think it is now, but I think it's going to be much greater next year. Much greater next year, especially when they start doing the economic deals. Kay says, nope, Steve, June. And Greg Mallard is here. Hi, Greg. He says, hi, Doc. Andy Kane says, in other words, U.S. gangsterism continues. U.S. Shipbuilding, Nissan, so low because they ain't hit nothing useful but food to send to Australia, if that. But U.S. doesn't have much to ship. Well, shipping back and forth is worth $1 trillion per year, the article says. So obviously, we're shipping a lot of stuff. Okay, so we have stuff to ship, and we have a lot of stuff to receive, and our boats are not bringing that stuff here. So Andy says, interesting. I sure didn't know India and Egypt were in BRICS. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, the I in BRICS is India. The reason why Egypt, okay, is not in its name is because Egypt was added just this year, as was Iran, as was Iran. That's the last of the comments. So I'm going to wind this up, go over to Dee's stream and help her out, but I'll be back with this wonderful piece by Michael Hudson, okay, and Radhika Desai on war with China in my stream, okay, tomorrow night. And if anything new happens, if there are any new things, okay, that appear, or any new news, okay, that appears, I'll be covering that, of course, tomorrow night as well. Okay, as I just did with the Pepe Escobar piece. Andy says, my daughter-in-law and her family are Catholic. And then she says, I thought the I was Iran. No, the I was India. A Johnny come lately to BRICS, K is Iran. Andy Candy says, night then, moonbeam. Love this article. Thank you, Andy. So do I. I love this article. I love the Pepe Escobar article, too. I mean, that was, I thought, a magnificent article. So, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Starshines and moonbeams. And, okay, I will see you tomorrow. And hopefully I will see some of you over at Dee's tonight, where I am going right now.